Sponsorointiala on murroksessa, se on tullut esille jo useammassa puheenvuorossa tänään ja nyt oman lusikkaansa soppaan tuo mies, jolla on myöskin erittäin laaja kokemus sponsorointi- ja tapahtuman markkinointialalta. Please welcome on stage Bruce Cook.
Thank you, Hannah. And thanks to Mika and all of you for having me here today. This is my first time ever in Finland. What I've seen so far is fantastic. It's gorgeous. It's very cold. I also come from a cold place originally. I found out in the taxi this morning on the way over here that I grew up actually about 100 miles away from Kim. Who here has seen the movie Fargo? I grew up in Fargo. Yeah, it's not quite like that, but it does have a soft place in my heart for it as well. Okay. Today, this is a little bit of what I'm going to try and cover. I'm not going to spend any time going through that today because I know we're short on time, so we'll just move right ahead. But I do want to give you a little bit of background on me. These are some of the companies that I've worked for or with in my career. And these are some of the titles that have appeared on my business cards. Now, the one title that hasn't appeared on my business card, and one that has probably been prevalent throughout it, is Idealist. I consider myself an idealist, and I've always thought that, but I thought if I'm coming here today, I'm going to say that to you, I better actually take a look at what that means. So I looked up a definition. And the first one I found says this: a person who is guided more by ideals than practical considerations, a pipe dreamer, a fantasizer, daydreamer, romantic, impractical, unrealistic person. That didn't sound very impressive, so I thought I better keep looking for another definition. And I like this one a bit better. It says a person who represents things as they might or should be rather than as they are. Essentially, I'm passionate about the truth and success and the belief that those two ideas are not mutually exclusive. So throughout my career, I continue to try and push these two concepts closer together, and the question then really becomes, is this possible and is it valuable? I think so, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, a little bit of context on from what we've said, and I won't go into too much detail here because a lot of this has been hit through by other people in their presentations. What this chart represents here, this is the brand reputation of the major financial institutions in the UK, and I've taken off the company names. Not that it's confidential information, it's done through a publicly available study, but I worked for one of these. If you remember from a couple of slides back, there was an RBS on there, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and RBS is represented by this line. So I've been part of the brand challenge for a while. And then who can tell me what this red line here represents? Anybody have an idea? Anyone? Say that again? The crisis, the financial crisis. No, that was around that time too. That's actually when I started working for RBS. Now, I can't take credit for all of this, but it was quite an experience. Next piece of context, as Klaus talked through, and his numbers will be more accurate and up-to-date, more relevant for you than mine, but the fact is the sponsorship industry is growing, and people are spending more. I think the great irony is, though, for challenge brands, and whether that be a reputational challenge or a financial challenge, they're starting to cut sponsorship, and that's exactly what I was going through for those 6 years. And the great irony is that those are the brands, those are the organizations that have the most to gain from sponsorship. So next, just a quick walk through the evolution of the sponsorship industry. A number of people have hit on this, and we know sponsorship in its actual definition and its origin comes from charity. This was sponsorship started as a way for the wealthy to help the worthy. But then, as that evolved, my text has jumped around a bit. It became about awareness, and if we're doing good for all of these organizations, if we're helping them along the way, we can actually get recognized for that. We can put our logo on a shirt or on the field or on the board of play. We can get on television, and suddenly that became a more strategic approach to it, and then we started measuring that. Okay, how much awareness do we have? What is the actual advertising equivalent value? If that was advertising, how much would that be worth? And we started adding that all up, and somehow along the way, that got confused with return on investment. And we know those two things are not the same, but what people were saying is, okay, I spend $1 million on my sponsorship, I'm getting 4.5 million in advertising value back, therefore my ROI is 4.5 to 1. And suddenly they said, therefore, sponsorship is more efficient than advertising. Well, I agree with that statement, but not for that reason. Now, what today's more evolved sponsorships are doing, they're taking not just an awareness approach to it, and not just visibility, but they're putting a message onto that. They're creating content and telling stories that add a flavor to their brand. And that's where most sponsorships are right now today, and those are good, and that works for a lot of them. But my contention is that the best sponsorships of the future will be the ones that take an honest look at what's really important and apply their resources in a meaningful way. Now, I don't mean that because they're kind or generous, because that would just be charity. Now, that's not what we're talking about. I'm saying that they're doing this because it actually makes good strategy. So, honest sponsorship, what am I talking about? I'm going to get some water here while we go. Sponsorship is a reflection of who you are as a company. And what I'm suggesting is that companies should use that opportunity to be honest about what you value, about your role in society, about what's really important. When we're talking to the public or to your staff, that's important. Too often, sponsorship takes a backseat to advertising. Advertising is where you get to talk the talk, but in sponsorship, you walk the walk. And we know that a brand is judged more by the way it walks than the way it talks. As they say, actions speak louder than words. So you better get your walk right. And ultimately, a sponsorship will reveal where your true priorities sit. Are you more focused on substance or style? Do you really care about your customers, or are you just interested in profits? Are you into meaningful activity, or is it just about media coverage? Is this a long-term thing or a quick fix? Are you into making a story in terms of making a difference, or just telling a story that is entertaining and interesting? And depending on what type of a brand you are, that'll determine where you need to be on that spectrum. But what I'm saying is that for these challenge brands, it's time to be honest and start really thinking about what we're doing. So let's look at this in a practical sense. And if you look at the traditional model of sponsorship and how it works, this isn't rocket science, but you're a brand, you've got something to say, you've got a message that you want to deliver to an audience, and naturally they're skeptical, as they should be, because you're doing the one talking, you're not going to say anything bad about yourself. So the theory of sponsorship is you find out what they love, you sponsor it, you create some affinity, and thereby delivering your message through that sponsorship, the audience is more receptive. At my time at RBS, we tried to articulate this in some way for use in our own minds as we're developing our strategies, but also when we're communicating with our senior marketing staff, who, to be honest, don't always understand sponsorship. How many have experienced that? You work in sponsorship, but the people above you don't quite get it. 1 or 2? Okay, 10? Yeah, I've felt that quite a bit. So the words we put down are this: sponsorship uses the passions of our audience to both drive business and visibly demonstrate how we help our customers in society. There's a lot of thought into the words that are chosen there. And one of the words that we chose very carefully and sometimes made us stop and think was this one: uses. We use the passions of our audience. And what we were saying there is that this is not just something that happens by chance. We're actually trying to manipulate the thinking of the people we're talking to. And if you bring that back to an honesty context, you have to question, is that right? But the more we thought about it and the more I think about it now, as long as we're trying to steer people's thinkings to the truth, then we're actually doing the right thing, and I'm okay with that. So that crisis averted. But the real opportunity here is we're talking about more than just trying to get our audience to be receptive. We want to actually get them to be enthused about us and to actually like us, not just be willing to tolerate us. There's a difference there. So what I'm suggesting is that you take that sponsorship and you build a program that is rooted in what's really important, in something meaningful, because then you've got integrity, you've got credibility, and most importantly, when you're talking to your audience, you can talk with confidence because you know you've delivered something of meaning. And then your message becomes not just receptive, but powerful. Okay, so now we understand what we're talking about with an honest sponsorship, or at least what I mean by that. Some brands are ready for that, but some aren't. And for a lot of marketers, honesty in a program like this is a bold step. And when I say bold, I don't mean the old bold, and those words have jumped around a bit too. But the old bold is outrageous and funny and wacky and crazy and all those things that you had to be a bit daring to do through your advertising or your marketing. And that still works for some brands, and it's effective. But for a more challenged brand, that's not what I mean when I say bold. In my mind, it's a much more bold step to do something honest, to do something meaningful, that's unproven, that's selfless, that focuses not just on the way you want to steer your brand perception, but something that is addressing something really meaningful. And there's a few examples I want to point out here. The first one, and it's not actually even a sponsorship, but at the recent Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, just this past June, they did something pretty impressive and pretty daring. During their opening ceremony, with the world's greatest athletes from 70 countries in the stadium, with some world-class entertainers on the stage, a stadium full of 60,000 people, and a billion people watching around the world, all ready to be entertained and ready to party, they said, "Stop. There's something bigger going on here. There are millions of children around the world starving and suffering and dying, and they need your help. So before we get the party started again, let's pull out your phones and text in and donate a few pounds." They quickly raised 5 million pounds, did that exercise. Now, people that knew they were doing this ahead of time, it was in the news stories. Is this going to spoil the atmosphere? Is this going to ruin the party? Well, you know what? They said, we don't care. This is more important than that. And in the end, everyone got into it. When the numbers came out and they realized it was effective, they've been praised for this. And I guarantee you'll see more things like this happening at big events. It was a bold move by them. So a couple of examples in a sponsorship context. The Friends Arena. How many of you have been to the Friends Arena in Stockholm? A few. How many of you heard of it? Good. Friends is an anti-bullying charity that's trying to help kids in schools. Doing a nice job. Well, they've got the title sponsorship of that arena, which, as I understand, is worth about 20 million euros. Who knows who the sponsor who that actually paid for that is? Absolutely. But their name is not on the arena. Now, I know there are stories around the politics of how this actually came to be, but the concept is what I'm more interested in. And I like the fact that an organization like that is using their long-standing relationship with Friends. This wasn't just a one-time deal. They've been involved with them for a long time. But they've paid for something and given it to an organization that can make a real difference in that. Now, I don't know I haven't done the studies. Maybe Klaus, you can help them. I don't know. Oh, right. Okay, well, send your questions to Anders.
Prolong the sponsorship with the Friends organization for as long as the arena sponsorship is as well, which is till 2023. So they're online with everything there. So they're main sponsors of the organization as well.
Okay. So in my mind, that is a bold sponsorship for the future. Another example from the world of Formula One, Diageo whiskey brand Johnny Walker as a sponsor of Formula One, and they're using the focus of their campaign around that sponsorship with this. This is if you can't tell what it is, that is a Formula One car made of whiskey glasses. And in the ad that runs, I don't think the link will work here. The car is formed, and you see it being formed by these glasses, and there's a very impassioned story. You'll find it on YouTube really easily about how it's important in driving a car to be in control, and they're talking about the precision, and you think they're talking about Formula One, and then suddenly that glass car smashes and it goes to bits. And their whole campaign behind it is about getting people to commit never to drive when they've been drinking. And last I checked, it's been running for a few months now, there were 450,000 commitments that have been gained online. I like that concept. What I have yet to see is whether that is the full driving force behind their sponsorship. That's one element of it, but the more they bring it to the fore, the more bold I think they're being. So we've talked a bit about this concept of bold sponsorship, and I've put together a few suggestions, keys, tips, I don't know what you want to call them. And I like this image, I don't know how well you can see it there, but going down this route of a bold and honest sponsorship is a bit like walking a ridge. You've got a gorgeous destination you're trying to get to, but one wrong step in the wrong direction could be disastrous. So you've got to get it right as you go through. Key number one, rethink your priorities. This list here is taken from some work we did at RBS as we were looking at our overall sponsorship strategy and looking at the opportunities presented by our sponsorships. What could we actually do with it? What could we gain? Well, you start at the top with we can get brand awareness, we can get affinity with the sports and the things that we sponsor, and ultimately we want to improve our brand perception. And then there's some other things we can do for customers and communities and clients and promotion and even maybe our staff at the end. But what ultimately happens is you start with that list, and then you start building a strategy and your measurement criteria, and everything focuses up here. Let's measure our awareness and our brand perception, and let's try and jump straight to that, and you end up trying to shortcut the system. So what we said is let's rethink our priorities. Let's get rid of the top two. Forget about that, because actually if you look at what's important to us as a company, what's important to our success has got nothing to do with those top two things. Our customers don't care about that. The things that we want to do as a business sit here, and if we use our sponsorship to do those things well, then what we get out of it is an actually meaningful outcome. So now, and that was going on about the time that I left, so we'll see how it turns out. Second key, fix a real problem. With RBS, we recognized quite a while ago that our target customer base and audience aligns very nicely with the rugby community. It's not the number one sport in the UK or in Europe, but it's second to football. But it aligned better and was more cost effective for us. But what we did is we're trying to reach out to communities. We've got branches and business and communities all across the UK. So we created a program called Rugby Force, where we actually go in and we help these local community rugby clubs to fix up their facilities before the season gets started. We provided the tools and the templates and the guidance and all that, and it's been a very successful program. More than 1,000 clubs have signed up over the years to participate in this program, and it's making a difference. But at that stage, it was mostly about what we call DIY. It was about going in and cleaning things up, painting things, fixing things, minor construction projects. And it was very successful. And that was a nice to have. It wasn't a real problem and an issue, though. And it was also something that wasn't tied directly to the expertise that we as an organization had. We wanted to make this more relevant. And what we were starting to hear was that many of these local rugby clubs, and remember, all of these are small businesses. They've got revenues, and they've got expenses, they've got employees, they've got operations, they've got things they're trying to do, and ultimately they're trying to deliver a sport that's important to a community and important to the kids. And if they fail as a business, that sport goes away, and that community suffers. And we were starting to hear that many of these clubs were struggling financially. They were taking advances from their brewers on beer sales, and they were unable to pay it back. We heard at one point the Welsh Rugby Union said at least 30 clubs had been identified as taking advances on beer sales, and they couldn't pay it back. We're talking £5,000 to £10,000, not a lot of money, but they were struggling to that extent. So what we did is we worked with the governing bodies of rugby to create a series of business advice seminars for rugby clubs. We've gone around the country. We do about 30 or 40 a year. Multiple clubs can come together. They send their secretaries, their treasurers, and they just get some basic business principles in place. And that's starting to have a meaningful difference. And that's what I say, fix a real problem. I think if you find something that is an actual issue, not just something that you think makes a nice photo op or a nice feel-good, something that's a real issue that you can be proud to tell the story of and to tell the case study of, that's when you've got a real winner. And following along those lines, the next key is to engage a third party. And what you're doing there is you're borrowing a positive reputation. It's all well and good to go out there and talk about yourself, but when somebody else talks about you, that's much more important. And it's important that it's an organization that has a positive reputation. That can be a governing body, and whether that's in sport, the arts, academic, or business, or whatever. The example here is NatWest is part of RBS, so they run the Rugby Force program in England. And the first couple of years that we ran Rugby Force, we did it on our own. We were a sponsor of the Six Nations Rugby Championship, so we had credibility in the sport of rugby, but we hadn't partnered with the national governing bodies. And we were running Rugby Force, and it was appreciated, but it wasn't really gaining the traction that we wanted it to. And in about the third year of it, we started to partner with the national governing bodies, and that's when the program really took off. Not only could we use their communications channels and their promotion of it, but suddenly we had the governing body, the organization that was benefiting the program, that was responsible for the sport, out there talking to the public and saying what NatWest is doing with Rugby Force is fantastic for our sport, it's fantastic for communities, and they were thanking us rather than us trying to pat ourselves on the back. If it's not a governing body, it could be a charity. Here's an example with EasyJet partnering with UNICEF. But ultimately what it comes down to is letting that third party sing your praises. Here's another example with HSBC and the relationship they have with Princess Trust. It's one thing for HSBC to say, we're interested in getting youth into employment, but this says, this announcement demonstrates a real commitment from HSBC to tackle youth unemployment and make the financial sector more accessible to disadvantaged young people. That carries a lot more weight. And that's coming from a press release, which also draws its own level of skepticism because that's a crafted quote. But as programs like that go on and that type of information and those type of comments appear in other Princess Trust marketing channels and communications channels, then that credibility stacks up for the sponsor. Fourth key, take your time. This doesn't happen overnight. You've got to show consistent, meaningful action over time, and you've got to expect the skeptics. Even if you're doing a really good thing, when you first put it out there, people aren't going to trust you. They're going to think you're in it for the wrong reasons. It takes time. And I think it's what you need is a minimum of a 3-year commitment. Because in the first year, people think you're just up to a PR stunt. And to be honest, because there's a lot of PR stunts out there, people are right to think that. In the second year, they see it again, they think, oh, this is just a repeat. Maybe they're just lazy, they can't think of anything else to do. I've seen this before, no big deal. But when you get to year 3, and then these are generalizations, but around year 3, people start to, first of all, they forget when you actually started by that time. They don't know how far back to look to the start of it. And if you're in it for this long, maybe you actually mean it. And by that point, you also have a track record of some impact, some results, and that's when you start to get a bit of impact on your brand. Now the next one, which I think is probably the most important, and a couple of people have touched on it today, and it's also the most difficult, is integrate. And when I say integrate, I mean with all of the other marketing functions. Your sponsorship has got to be linked in, and you've got to be in sync with your advertising team, with your community investment team, with the media relations team, with sustainability, with employee comms. All these other functions within marketing have got to be on board with what you're doing, and they've got to be a part of it. You know, and Kim said you don't have to invest all this extra money. There's all kinds of other activity that these other departments are already doing. And if they're genuinely bought into what you're doing and this meaningful program that you've put together, they will see it as Kim said, it's a catalyst. We use the term accelerator. It helps to accelerate all of your other communications that you're putting out there. Because if you're not in sync with them, you're going to be in competition with them. You're going to be in competition for space, for approval, and most importantly, for budget. So the analogy I use is sponsorship as an island doesn't work. Because if it's an island, if it sits out there by itself, it's seen as a drain on resources that never returns anything to the mainland. And if you find yourself in that situation with your sponsorship, you're going to feel like this guy. And that's actually a picture of me not too long ago. I've since shaved and bought a pair of shoes, but that wasn't a good feeling. Key number 6, go big or go home. And that sounds kind of like a sports analogy. And the point here is that for a lot of CSR or community programs or initiatives, or at least activity that's tied to sponsorship, it just sits right here. It's a photo op. Your awareness is minimal. It's a nice story for a single day, but it goes away, and there's really very little impact on your brand and what you're trying to do there. If you actually create a meaningful program, something like Rugby Force or something else, you're actually having an impact on a target group of people that need your help. And you're actually running a great program and putting it out there. Those people become aware of what you're doing. And usually those programs top out at about 5% awareness across the general public. And you're starting to get a little bit of impact on your brand there. And that's a good thing. But at some point, when you cross beyond that, there's a point, and I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10% public awareness, where it requires the investment. It requires the input from your advertising and your other channels, and it's not just about the cost of delivering the program, because actually the cost of delivering a program like this often isn't that great. But if you want to get the word out there and promote it, you're going to have to invest. You're going to have to do something more. And somewhere between, as you start to do that, between the 5 and 10% awareness level of a program, I'm not talking about your overall sponsorship, I'm talking about the meaningful program that you've created with that sponsorship. With that awareness, you start to hit a critical mass, and that's when it gets really exciting, because then your big opportunity is ahead of that. And unfortunately, too many programs stop right there. That's as far as they get. That's as far as they're willing to go, and they worked really hard to get there. But the big opportunity lies beyond that, and they're leaving so much on the table by not taking it further. With Rugby Force, we got to around 5%. We occasionally creeped up into the 7 range. I think in Scotland, we were up close to 9% at one point, but that's as far as we ever got. Key number 7, embrace humility. This is a word that's getting used a lot in strategy and in marketing lately, and I've already talked a little bit about the importance of what others say about you and how that carries a lot more credibility than what you say about yourself. There's a flip side to that says your brand is also influenced by what you say about others. And that's a subtle difference there, because this is not you talking about yourself. This is not someone else talking about you. This is you talking about others, be that your customers or whoever. And you see, here's one example. You're seeing articles written about the importance of humility in business practice, in marketing campaigns. You're seeing a lot of sports organizations adapt. They've got all their values that go with their sport, and humility is one that's often pushed out there. I don't always buy it in some sports, but they recognize that it's important, but it's out there. And this was an issue for us in one of our sponsorships at RBS. It was in the farming agricultural sector. And we wanted to talk about the fact that we really appreciate and help our customers who are farmers. It's a big sector of the small business community. It's an important one to so many people, and we wanted to put a message. We were sponsoring the big agricultural show in Edinburgh, and we wanted to talk about that to a wider audience. So we started from a place that says, as you're talking about, we're customer focused, and you see a lot of Banks are well known for this, energy companies do it. But they go out there with an advertising campaign of some sort that says, we care about our customers. Well, that's just talk. Of course you're going to say that. And that doesn't make you a great company. The words I've put on here are just conceptual. They're not words that we actually use, don't worry. But essentially, that's all we were saying. We're a great company because we put our customers first. I'm sorry, but the audiences are all smarter than that. The next phase in the evolution of that is saying, okay, our customers are great. So instead of saying we're great, we're going to say they're great. But they're great because we've helped them be great. And that's as far as we got with this campaign. And push as I might, I don't think that went far enough. I think that is still talking about us. I don't think that's not humility. That's just, playing with words. I think where we want to get to is to say our customer's great. We appreciate them and we think you should too. And then shut up. Don't talk about yourself. People know who's doing the talking, but just, make your comment on your customers, give your praise, and shut up. It'll be much more effective. That's where we need to be. And then my final tip here, number 8, is to measure the right things. I know we've talked a lot about measurement here, and often when you get into programs like I've been talking about, these honest, meaningful programs, community programs, a lot of people think they're intangible and therefore they're difficult to measure. Well, I answered, no, they're not. And I answer that in 2 ways. First of all, and I think a lot of people know this, you've got the metrics of your program. Whether it's the money you've raised or the number of people you've helped or the meals you've served or whatever it be, any meaningful program has a measurable goal. So you can measure those. And knowing where you started and where you get to, that's important, and you can use that to report externally, because your external audiences will want to know if this is a credible program, what are you actually doing? This is important to your customers, to the general public, to politicians, to your staff, to the media, from an external standpoint. But there's a whole other side of it that looks at your strategy and where you're spending your marketing money and what you're doing with it and what's the impact that it's having on your brand. And that's where you've got to measure the awareness of that program. You've got to look at your brand metrics, your favorability, your trust, your consideration. Are you changing for the better? Are you making a positive impact on communities? We had a whole slew of brand metrics that we would measure. And then you look at the correlation between the two and then track that over time. Now, and this becomes more important internally as you're measuring your return on objectives, when you're looking for board support, when you're making budget decisions and you're looking at your overall strategic impact. This is where that part comes into play, and you need a good study. You need a good tool to measure that and to track it with. But if you're going to do something meaningful, if you're going to try and make a difference, if you're going to invest what it takes to put a good program out there, you've got to measure it properly. A little bit more on how the model of that works. If you're looking at awareness of those who are aware of your program versus those who are unaware, they should and will have a difference of opinion. And I thought this was really interesting. If you looked at something like our pure sponsorship of the RBS Six Nations, massive rugby tournament, there were 43% of the general public across the UK were aware that we were the sponsor of that championship. Well, that makes sense because it is called the RBS Six Nations. It's hard to miss. Our logo's on the pitch really big. But on various brand metrics, you would see an uplift of 5 to 7%. The people that were aware of it did like us a little bit more, and you're not proving cause and effect there, but there is a correlation. So the people that were aware of that were much more, or slightly more positive towards us as a brand. But when you looked at our Rugby Force program, the people that were aware of that program compared to those unaware had a 20 to 30% uplift in many of these brand metrics. So there was a much higher impact from a percentage uplift, but the problem was, as I said, only 5 to 7% of the people were aware of it. So you've got to have a way to disentangle those two things. Big awareness, lower percentage impact. How many people are you actually influencing? So that's where you bring in that uplift percentage and look at the number of people who are aware, and you get an actual impact score measured in number of people influenced. And then taking that a step further, and this is the one that sometimes makes people nervous, as you take that impact score, you look at how much you invest to get that result, and then you come out with a cost per person influenced. And then you can compare the efficiency of some of your smaller programs to the bigger ones and see where your real impact. Now you've got to take all of this with a grain of salt. It's good for strategic thinking, it's good for discussion, but nothing is absolute. I've always said about ROI models, return on objectives, absolutely, you've got to measure that. You've got to have a good tool to do it if you're going to do it properly. But too many people get caught up in ROI, and the problem with ROI is even if you create the perfect ROI that says, I know for a fact, documented, that for every pound I spend, I get 2.3 pounds back, that's great. Even if you have a foolproof model that cannot be challenged, the problem with it is you try and use that information internally, no one's going to believe you. Because there's never been an actual accurate ROI model, and there's so many ways you can manipulate it, so many variables, that even if you have the right answer, nobody's going to believe you. So it almost becomes worthless. So you're much better off measuring return on objectives. Okay, all of this has been from a brand perspective. Briefly, I want to just touch on what does this mean for properties, because some of you are rights holders and not brands as well. The first thing it says is an opportunity for me is your audience. Take a look at your audience. Build it, grow it, define it. Make sure you're very clear on everything you can know about your audience, not just their demographics, but their psychographics too. Not how old they are and how much money they make, that is important, but how they think, how they act. Who are they? And then you've got to get ready to sell that. Secondly, think about your value. What is the value that you provide to communities and to people in society? And then look for a brand that can benefit, that's trying to do the same thing. If there's a brand that's trying to do what you can deliver, then you've got a good potential partnership out there. I talked about praise. If you've got a devoted, loyal audience, don't forget about the value that comes from your audience praising a sponsor or a brand for what they've done to help out the sport or the organization or the event that they love. And as we've talked about, that is much more credible than any brand's own advertising. So that's something that's very saleable for you. And finally, I think that there's a point to be made about the fact that a good partnership will make you a better property, a better event, a better sport, a better governing body. And sometimes you need to not look past the challenged brands, because a brand that has a challenge that is struggling, even if it's financial, but if it's got a brand reputation challenge, sometimes these are great opportunities. We've talked about today about real partnerships, and sponsorship is not just advertising. It is not just, can they afford to buy more visibility? It's about making a meaningful difference. And a brand that has a challenge needs a partner, and if you have credibility that you can loan, you've got a good opportunity there. So don't write those potential partners off, but it is important that you position yourself and have that discussion in the right way and understand where they're coming from. So that's all the advice I have. I'm going to leave you with a couple of my favorite quotes. I think, Kim, you said this was easy, and I'm saying it's not so easy. I think it's very complex, and one of my favorite quotes comes from ancient Greek poetry, and you usually see this in a sporting context, and it is, "Badness you can get easily in quantity. The road is smooth and lies close by. But in front of excellence, the immortal gods have put sweat, and long and steep is the way to it, and rough at first. But when you come to the top, then it is easy, even though it is hard." That means to me is there's a lot of good to be done, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to be complex and challenging at times. And once we get through that, then it becomes more clear, but that doesn't mean the work stops. Staying on top is as hard as getting there. And the last one in a similar vein, Oliver Wendell Holmes talks about the worthlessness of the whole concept of ignorance as bliss. He says, "I would not give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. It's struggling through that complex situation of learning what to do and why, but once you get there, you know, that's the holy grail, if you can get there. But in the meantime, keep fighting on. That's it for me.